Hello there, it's Toby Jones here and welcome to a new video on the channel. Today it's time for something new for me, a first, and that is a film review. And today we're going to be talking about the 2017 film starring Meryl Streep and Tom Hanks, The Post. And just to give you an idea of what this film is about, if we read on the back blurb or the synopsis, Oscar winners Steven Spielberg, Meryl Streep and Tom Hanks team up for the very first time in this thrilling, acclaimed drama. The Post tells the incredible story of the unlikely partnership between the Washington Post's Katharine Graham, played by Streep, and editor Ben Bradlee, played by Tom Hanks, as they strive to expose a massive cover-up of this devastating government secrets, risking their careers and very freedom in a fight for the truth. And this is actually the second time I've visited this film. I did watch about half of the film couple of months ago, I guess, on Channel 4 on demand. The annoying thing with that was I'd started watching the film, and with all the on-demand channels, unless it's iPlayer over in the UK, you get adverts every 10 or 15 minutes, which, when you're trying to watch a film, really breaks up the tempo of the film, I find. And before we get into this, you can see I've got some props around me, and this is my first film review, and when I'm doing music stuff, I like to have a lot of music around me, and not have anything around me, I just felt naked, ultimately. So I've got a couple of Tom Hanks films around me, albeit I haven't watched all of these yet, but some of these I've watched, and of course one of the best films of all time, Toy Story 3, no doubt. But why did I choose to watch this? Well, I've been watching quite a few Tom Hanks films recently, with mixed results. I watched his newish film Greyhound on Apple TV. I got a 3-month free trial. I got a new iPhone through work and got an Apple TV free trial through that. And that was god-awful. I watched Bridge of Spies in January, which was an excellent film. For some reason, I can't find the DVD. I hope I've not given it back to the charity shop. I've also watched this film quite recently, Larry Crowne, with Tom Cruise. I want to say Tom Cruise, I don't know why. Tom Hanks and Julie Roberts. Julia Roberts, another one of my favourite actresses, I should say. And although it's good performances from both of them, it's not the best film. It's a bit of a slog. And then earlier this week, I watched one of his Netflix films, News of the World, which is another good film. I rated that as a 7 out of 10. So I've been watching a fair amount of Tom Hanks recently, and that continued with The Post. Now, in terms of Meryl Streep, I've watched Meryl Streep before in The Manchurian Candidate with Denzel Washington. As some of you will know, I'm a big Denzel Washington fan going through all of his films, and I rated that 10 out of 10. So, going into this, Meryl Streep, Tom Hanks, directed by Steven Spielberg, perfect combination, absolutely fantastic. As I said, I started watching this a couple of months ago, watched about half an hour of it, enjoyed it, but not massively. I was maybe focused on other things whilst watching it, and then the irritation of the adverts really annoyed me as well. But I went for a charity shop sweep on Saturday, spent about £20 on DVDs, CDs and books, and have nearly run out of room in that rack for all my CDs now, in the wardrobe for my DVDs, and on the bookshelf for books, so you get the picture. But The Post is a DVD I saw. It was free for £1 in that shop, and I thought, right, I started watching this before. It's a Tom Hanks film. I want to watch some more Tom Hanks films, and that's exactly what I did. I picked this up. Now, what you'll always get on DVD covers, they're trying to promote the film. So people are going to say it's good, but on this particular cover, one of the best films ever made, exhilarating, 5 stars from The Sun, 5 stars from Metro, exceptional from IGN. On the back cover, we've got 2 5-star ratings, a couple of 4-star ratings. You can see there's 10 different comments on the back cover, and then on the front cover, a few different comments on there as well. So it does make you wonder whether you go, okay, going into this, obviously it's meant to be pretty good. And also, on the bottom, based on true events, which really elevated this film for me. So we'll come to that. So, as I've said before, Meryl Streep plays Katharine Graham, who's the publisher of the Washington Post. And Tom Hanks plays Ben Bradlee, who's a long-time executive editor of the Washington Post. And the film's based on true events, as it says on the front cover, with the publishing of the Pentagon Papers, which, if you're not aware what that's about, is basically the truth behind America's involvement in the Vietnam War, and some earlier conflicts and decisions made by the government that had effectively been kept secret from the American public. And what I always like is when you go into a film based on true events that you don't know a lot, or in this case pretty much anything about, and that was great with this. And another thing that was great with this film is that a lot of films I've watched recently, they trudge a bit. It's a bit of a slog, the first half, and then you get into the action the second half, and you think, okay, that was an okay film. But one thing I would say is a real thumbs up for this, it gets into things pretty much straight away. You get the main story of the New York Times, which is the Washington Post competitor, a journalist called, I think it's Neil Sheehan, from the New York Times, who gets the first leak of these Pentagon Papers, publishes it in the New York Times, and Tom Hanks is the editor. Ben Bradley is really frustrated that the New York Times has got the beat on the Washington Post on that, and there's several things going on here which is great. You've got the linear storyline, so you've got the storyline of the New York Times published this info about the Pentagon Papers. Richard Nixon bans the New York Times from publishing anymore, and there's a whole court injunction that goes on there. And you've also got obviously that competitiveness between the Washington Post and the New York Times, which was seen at the time as effectively a bit of a local paper, nothing more than that. You've got Tom Hanks' character, who's just a really competitive editor, and you've got that whole competitiveness of the newspaper industry, which I didn't think of too much in the back of my head. You've also got a great story of Meryl Streep's character, who is the owner of the Washington Post and the publisher of the Washington Post. And the interesting thing behind this is that she inherited this from her husband, who committed suicide in 1963, and she's been the bigwig at the Washington Post for 8 years. And what's great, a couple of times early in this film, you see Streep's character in a boardroom full of men, which at the time is fairly average for the time. Obviously, things have moved on thoroughly since then. But what's really good is Meryl Streep at the start of this film, her character Catherine Graham. Is that right? Catherine Graham? I'm just looking at my notes. Catherine Graham, not Carol Graham, as I said earlier. She's dominated by these men in the early scenes, and she's got an advisor, I think it's Fritz, who talks her through all the things to say, and she's fairly confident before she goes into the boardroom with things to say, but then gets shut down ultimately by the power, the domination of that male culture in the boardroom. But as you see the film go on, and the big decision made when the papers get leaked to the Washington Post, the decision made then by Streep's characters to actually publish these, despite all of the men, all the advisors going, no, don't do this, you'd be stupid to do this, you could ruin the legacy of your husband, his father, who owned the paper before. But despite all that, goes on to do it, and that's really special, the journey that Streep's character goes on. I really enjoy that as well. So there's that story. You've got Tom Hanks as well, and ultimately with Tom Hanks, you just know that you'll get a good performance. Some of his films, as I say, I've watched recently have been mixed, but you know that if it's a negative appraisal you're going to give of a film, very rarely is it down to Tom Hanks himself, because he always gives a good performance. He's one of those real bankable actors, I think. One of my favourite actors to watch on screen anyway. So the film ultimately is really supported by its main two characters being Tom Hanks and Meryl Streep. There's other actors who appear there, but generally speaking, Hanks and Streep get the majority of the screen time. And there's some friction between their characters, but ultimately in the end they join forces and agree on this decision to publish, which is followed up by other papers doing it, and really seen as a great decision in the end, and changing the whole face of the media industry, the newspaper industry in the US to come. But what I also like about this film, being a bit of a political geek, is that you get shots from time to time, occasionally, of effectively the White House to the back of Richard Nixon's head. So somebody doesn't actually play Nixon, because what happens is you get some good audio recordings from Henry Kissinger, which was one of Nixon's advisors, I think, at the time, and Richard Nixon. Basically, the real thing. Not acted, not untrue, the real recordings. And I absolutely love that when it comes to something based on true events, because you get the whole truth, nothing but the truth out of it. And Richard Nixon's real aggressiveness towards the whole situation. And once the Washington Post publishes, basically saying, I don't want to see anybody with the Washington Post associated with his White House ever again. And the interesting thing of Meryl Streep's character Graham being associated with JFK, Lyndon B. Johnson, and also what's the word? Schmoozing, I guess you could say, with Richard Nixon beforehand, only for it to be a bit of a facade, really, because Richard Nixon is not interested, in fact, really angry at these revelations that have come out after that. So I'm a bit of a political geek, albeit that's been brought down a bit by the whole lockdown and COVID situation, which I'm not going to go into. I'd want to shut away from the news. But I also studied American, well, could you call it American politics? It was related. I studied civil rights in the USA from the 1860s to the late 90s in my A-levels. So I've got a decent knowledge of the presidents towards that. And I always love... I've got a particular interest in 9/11 in terms of the reaction from that, from the president and the world, and the whole war on terror that followed that. So this is effectively quite closely linked to the themes involved. So I really enjoyed it from that point of view as well. And really, the film's just a real tense thriller with a lot going on throughout. There's not the typical dull moments. It really flies from start to end. There's not a moment I find myself bored in this film at all. Maybe one criticism you could say is that it's all brought to an end quite suddenly, because the decision made to publish in the Post is probably made 20 minutes before the end of the film. This clocks in at 1 minute 50, and 1 minute 30 roughly was when they went to publish, and then the film obviously ends 20 minutes later. And I think that because the film is very good in the way it moves, obviously it benefits from having a shorter runtime, because what really annoys me is when some films I watch are 2.5, 3 hours without really needing to be. It can be condensed into 2 hours. An antithesis against that is the Elvis film I watched last year, which ironically has also got Tom Hanks in it as well, playing the Colonel. But that really fled by. But when you look at another film like James Bond: No Time to Die, that was way too long for absolutely no reason. But this clocked it in 1:50, and for the film, never felt like a long film. Just went by and felt like the perfect length. But the film, yes, it does end quite quickly, but ultimately, I think as a viewer, you kind of clock on what's going to happen, which in the end is the Supreme Court ruling in favour of the Washington Post. You get a great scene where Tom Hanks' character brings 6 different newspapers or 7 different newspapers into Meryl Streep's character's office and lays them all out on the table, and they've all reported the same thing. So the Washington Post was really the pioneer, and then all these different papers have followed on from that, and that's a real crowning moment for Streep's character and the bond that she builds with Tom Hanks' character through the film as well. To spoil the final act of the film, and if you haven't watched this yet, I think this is quite a groundbreaking moment, something I really love about this. The last shot of the film is the discovery by the security guard that the Watergate offices have been broken into, which anybody with a bit of knowledge will know that whole scandal brought to an end the Richard Nixon presidency. And what I loved about that is this film is a very confined film within the whole Vietnam War, and obviously the legal battle as such, the political and legal battle for the Post to publish. But what is really good, ending on that Watergate building, really put a thought in my head, thinking, okay, so you've got the extension of that era, so it's not just confined to that, and I really like that. And ironically, there is another film which I haven't watched, starring Dustin Hoffman. Getting all these names wrong. Not rare here. Dustin Hoffman and Robert Redford, called All the President's Men, which was released in 1976, which actually starts at the very moment that this film ends, with the Watergate offices being broken into, and then the whole scandal that brought down Richard Nixon's presidency. So, really just a great film, if you couldn't tell already. I really enjoyed this. Didn't outstay its welcome. Carried brilliantly by 2 actors that performed brilliantly in their main roles. And I gave The Post, in my Letterboxd review, a 9 out of 10, which puts it as one of my favourite Tom Hanks films. And a really good film in general. So a real good watch. Really happy I picked it up from the charity shop. I'd probably watch it again, in time. I don't think it's one of those films that you just watch once and think, forget it in the future. I think it is a really good film that I'd probably watch again, but probably leave it a little while. But that's all I'm going to say about The Post today. If you've watched the film as well, let me know what you think down in the comments. If you've liked this being my first film review, leave me a like. That would be really appreciated. Also, comment your thoughts on the review. If there's anything I can do to improve, that would be great feedback from you guys. And also subscribe for regular music and film reviews coming on the channel, hopefully every week. Thank you for your company today. I've really enjoyed talking about The Post, and hopefully there'll be more of these sort of videos coming. Probably for films that I either really like or dislike. 'Cause it's very tricky to talk about a film that's middle of the road, isn't it? If it's kind of a 2.5 or 3 stars, you think, well, it was okay, but there's not much to talk about. But The Post was so good that I think it merited a review of its own on the channel today. And obviously the film later was nominated for Oscars and won plenty of awards. I think Meryl Streep was nominated for Best Actress at the 2018 Oscars, I guess it would have been. And some real accolades brought to the film and positive reviews from critics as well. So I'm not the only person to give this a positive review, which is a rarity because I tend to be a contrarian with most things. But thank you very much for your company today. I've been Toby Jones, and until the next time, I will see you all later. Goodbye for now.